Never underestimate the influence you can have on children that are not your own. Like as we grow and as we develop, we can influence others. Like how can we as an adults role model this way of being?
I really consider youth to be our society's most precious resource, and overdoses are the number one cause of death of teenagers. We're in a worldwide overdose crisis right now, and mostly opioids, mostly driven by fentanyl. It is one of the things that keeps me awake. There's suffering there, and we need a way to handle it. And modern medicine has a lot of great tools, but we were not taught how to respond to suffering. And that's maybe something that medicine doesn't offer, that something like mindfulness can offer. When we're sick, when we're in pain, there's the sickness and the pain, and then there's also a suffering. That's where I think mindfulness can come in.
Yeah.
And our vision is to nurture and co-create a more mindful hospital. How can I get my teenager to be more mindful? And my answer to them is, what does your mindfulness practice look like?
And there's a joy.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you can speak a little bit about that joy. Sometimes we get caught in like, I just got to get rid of a problem or I got to reduce my suffering, but there's something about joy.
Yeah. Joy is
I just want to quickly thank you for beginning to watch this podcast episode. If you haven't subscribed yet, feel free to do so. Would love it if you join our community. You'll also be up to date on the latest content, and this really helps me reach out to more guests. You can also visit our website, centerformindfulness.ca. There's free events about mindfulness and laughter. Hope you enjoy this episode. Hello, everyone. In today's episode, I am so excited to share a conversation with Dr. Dzung Vo. We'll be diving into mindfulness, mental health, stress, resilience, healing for teens and adults. And we'll even talk a little bit about social justice. So, first, a warm welcome to you.
Thank you. It's really lovely to be here, Kasim. We've known each other for years now. It's a real honor to have this conversation to talk about, I think, favorite subject for both yourself and myself, and hopefully for our listeners as well to be able to benefit and also have a mindful experience as they're listening to this conversation about mindfulness. That would be lovely, wouldn't it?
Oh, beautiful. So it becomes like a mindful listening practice.
Exactly.
Right. I'll have to tell you, I've been really looking forward and excited to share this conversation. And I have to say, for those who are not as familiar with your work, besides your truly profound work you've done, and I'll read your bio in a moment, you're such a kind human being. And you're so generous in your time and service to others. And I experienced that because a couple of years ago, I was interested in bringing mindfulness for teens in my center. And you were just so generous with your time and the program you're teaching, which we'll speak about in program for teens. So, truly, for those who haven't had the opportunity to work with you, thank you for who you are and for embodying this work. Truly, I experienced it directly, not just from like a book or something. Like you walk the talk. So thank you.
That's very nice of you,
Yeah,
Kasim.
yeah, thank you. So, for those who are not familiar with your work, I'll just be reading your bio. So, Dr. Vu is a pediatrician specializing in adolescent medicine. He's a founding director of BC Children's Hospital Center for Mindfulness in Vancouver. He's also the author of Mindful Teen, which, by the way, I have right here. It's a really good book. I highly recommend. And he co developed with Dr. Jake Locke the MARS program, Mindful Awareness and Resilience for Adolescents, MARS A. And I'm also really interested. There's so much to cover here, but to speak about this more recent program you developed, Mindful Healing Course for
Mm,
healthcare providers. And maybe we'll come back to that as well.
for sure.
So, can we maybe begin with like, how did you get started? Healthcare provider. What was your journey to mindfulness?
Yeah, I love sharing this story, and I actually would love to hear your story too, because I don't think I've heard your story. If you're willing to share,
Yes.
yeah, this is one of my favorite topics of conversation. My story started, I would say, before I was born. So I
Mm,
am Vietnamese American. My parents are from Vietnam.
mm,
And on my father's side in particular, his our roots are from the city of Hue, which is in the
mm,
central Vietnam, which is a real spiritual center of Vietnam. And so there's a very long tradition, hundreds, thousands of years of Vietnamese Buddhism in that area.
mm,
And so my dad grew up in this through his family. And during the Vietnam War period, 1950s, 60s, he was a student of Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh, who
mm,
I consider to be my root teacher.
mm.
And so I was introduced to Vietnamese Buddhism and to Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh as a child, as a
Wow.
teenager. My dad talked a lot about it. He taught our whole family. Now, that said, it wasn't a straightforward journey. And like
Mhm.
many teenagers, I was not super interested in meditating at age 15, to be
Right.
completely honest with you. Okay. But those seeds were planted very deeply. And by the time I
Mm,
became 18, 19, 22, I was really ready to kind of follow that path on my own terms and make
mm,
it my own. So I became a student of Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh. I went on my first retreat at Plum Village Meditation Center in France in 1999. This was just
mm.
before I started medical school.
Oh,
And I
what a
have
timing.
Oh, it was amazing. I honestly don't think I would have survived my medical training without that experience. It really became the
Mhm.
foundation of both who I want to be as a human being, also what kind of healer do I want to be as a physician, and then later, what kind
Mm.
of practical therapeutic tools could I bring to the patients that I serve? And that's a whole nother story. But it really began with Vietnamese Buddhism, with my family, and with Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh. So I always want to give
Mm.
credit to my teachers.
Mm. What a deeply rooted and this pull you actually had, even though it was in the family, it was in the culture, but you actually had the pull to want to like, no, I want to like water the seed while your father and your family supported you with planting these seeds, but you really watered them. You chose to keep watering them. And I'm curious too, is there um, a meaning to your name, these
Mm.
roots?
Yeah, my meaning, I have a few different names actually. So my name that my parents gave me in Vietnamese, it would be pronounced Dũng or
Mm,
Dũng. In English, I introduce myself as Zoom, like Zoom
mm.
Zoom, ZOOM. But
Yes.
the Vietnamese pronunciation and meaning is a little bit different, and it actually is a Buddhist term which signifies diligence and perseverance. And for
Mm,
me, that was a big challenge because that wasn't something that came natural to me to be diligent, have that discipline, persevere through challenges and adversity. And the mindfulness practice actually gave me a concrete tool and a concrete way of doing that in my life. So I consider it an aspirational name. It's something that
mm.
I try to live up to rather than a descriptive name about like who I actually
All
am.
right. But what a beautiful aspirational name that you really have leaned into in your life, like through going through medical school for creating, like just creating these programs to support teens. And like, what made you interested in to work with this population?
I think teenagers are amazing. They're at a really wonderful time of life. I can certainly think about when I was growing up as a teenager, I had some real significant challenges. I grew up in North Carolina. There was a lot of
Mm.
racism there, and I think we're going to be talking about social pediatrics and social
Yeah.
justice later. So I certainly experienced a lot of that firsthand. I
Mm,
also experienced my own mental health challenges. And then I also experienced the power of learning and growth. And I had some key people in my life, including my parents, who really helped me to learn and grow from those challenges. And
mm,
I came to see adolescence as a really unique time in life where that growth is possible, where that learning can
mm,
happen. And in fact, adolescents are my mentor, Ken Ginsberg, he calls them super learners. Their brain
mm,
primed to learn from experience, both positive and negative experience. So it's such a fun time. There's so much creativity. So I think I knew, as I entered medical school, that I wanted to work with young people. I wanted to work
mm,
with teenagers because it's just such a fun, challenging, but also very rewarding time of life where there's such opportunity. And when we can help a young person develop in a positive way, then that gives what we call a triple dividend. The World Health Organization came up with that. So it helps not only the adolescent,
Mm,
but it sets them on a lifelong path, because when adolescents learn healthy coping skills, healthy behaviors, then that sets them on the stage for lifelong healthy behaviors. Or on the other hand, if they learn unhealthy behaviors, unhealthy coping strategies like substance use, for example, then that can
mm,
set a lifelong path of unhealthy behaviors too. So the
mm,
triple dividend is the adolescent,
mm,
their rest of their life, and the future generation, because if they become parents or caregivers when they are healthy, they can pass that on, those strengths, those behaviors, that resilience, they can pass that on. So it's really
mm,
an investment for our society. I really consider youth to be our society's most precious resource, and it's
mm.
such a honor and privilege to be able to serve young people and to invest in the future of our world.
Mm. Investment was the word that popped in my mind just before you shared. I'm like, this is an investment in the future. And the importance that as adults, we also do our work to really role model
Absolutely.
for teens. So this is whether someone is a parent or someone who's not a parent as well. I actually read way back, maybe it was in like 96 or 7, first time, like I really was curious about like reading and expanding my mind. I read this book that said, never underestimate the influence you can have on children that are not your own.
Hmm.
Right? Like this, like, wait a minute, there's like, as we grow and as we develop, we can influence others.
Absolutely.
And that's why I find your work to be so important for someone who's a parent or not a parent. Like, how can we as an adults role model this way of being?
Yeah, I'm really picking up on three things that I heard you say. So one is role modeling and
Mm,
embodying what we want to see in young people, ourselves as adults. And I get this question often from
mm,
health professionals, from educators, and from parents and caregivers. How can I get my teenager to be more mindful? Or it could be something like, how can I get my teenager to have a healthier relationship with their electronic devices?
yeah.
And my answer to them is always, well, what does your mindfulness practice look like? What does your relationship with electronic devices or substances or
Mm,
whatever it is that you want to see in your teenager? How are you modeling that for yourself? Because
yeah.
teenagers learn so much more from what adults say than what they do. In
Mm,
fact, when adults tell teenagers to do things and the teenager sees that the adult themselves is doing something different, that comes across as a very disrespectful and, in fact, hypocritical message.
yeah.
Teenagers have a very strong, I call it a BS meter. They detect hypocrisy from hundreds of miles away, and it's an immediate turnoff. And then it doesn't matter what the adult says. If they're not
Mm,
living, if they're not acting what they're asking their teenager to act, then it's useless. And it doesn't mean that they have to be perfect, right? Because role modeling for a teenager includes role modeling how to make a mistake, how to
yeah.
fail, how to practice self-compassion when things don't go well, how to learn how to grow from challenges and mistakes. So I'm not saying adults have to be perfect,
Oh,
but they
no.
do have to model the intention and the practice. Second thing that I heard you say, and I want to expand on a little bit, is
Mm,
the role of adults in teenagers' lives in general.
mm,
Often parents have a difficult time raising teenagers because they feel like the teenagers, they don't want to talk to me anymore, they're pushing me away, they're not telling me anything. And I want parents to know that even when that's happening, first of all, it's developmentally normal. There are reasons that the teenagers are doing that as part of their
mm.
growth towards independence, and in fact they need to be able to do that.
The pushback.
The
Yeah.
pushback, but
Yeah.
it does not mean that the parents don't matter. In fact, the kids are still watching the parents very closely. They still need
Mm,
parents very much, or caregivers or guardians. They need those adults in their lives, even if they're not saying that. And
mm,
then thirdly, there's been a wealth of research in the positive youth development field over the past, I would say, 40 years now, which has
mm,
shown that one of the biggest protective factors for young people is a non-parental caring adult. And so that
mm,
gets to what you were saying about adults who are not the parents, but maybe you're a teacher, maybe you're a sports coach, maybe you're an
mm,
art coach, maybe you're an aunt or an uncle or an
mm.
adult cousin, or a health professional or counselor
Neighbor.
or neighbor,
Yeah.
yeah, janitor at the school.
Yeah.
Like those people can have profound impacts on adolescents. And again, teenagers need that adult who is not their parents, because they are programmed to push away against their
Yeah.
parents to some degree, but they also need adult guidance. And when I think about how humans have developed and grown for centuries and millennia, that has always been how humans have developed, with the extended family, the village to
Yeah.
raise the child. This idea of the nuclear family, and like it's the responsibility only of two people or even one person to
No
raise a.
pressure at all.
Yeah, I don't think it's realistic. I don't
That,
think that's ideal. It's not how
mm,
humans have evolved.
yeah, it doesn't bring this more of a group community wisdom.
Exactly,
Like,
exactly.
yeah, yeah. And you know how you're describing it too, this way of working with teens, not seeing them as that problem. It's even if it's behavior that's happening, it's like it could be a system of a like a family systems issue, and that's why I feel your work is so valuable, is for us the adults to go,
Mm,
how am I living my life?
yeah,
How am I? Is there something that I can improve on my own well-being? It's
yeah,
whether am I exercising? Am I being kind? Am I practicing mindfulness if it supports me or if it's for me? And I encourage that to adults, those who haven't given it a chance. Maybe give it a chance. Mindfulness, and we do have free sessions at our center about mindfulness, so you can
fantastic,
visit that.
fantastic.
So maybe can we explain for those who maybe haven't heard the term, what is mindfulness, and
Mhm.
like what's the science behind its possible benefits, mental health?
Yeah, that word has really become a buzzword in the last 10 years. When I first started practicing mindfulness in 1999 with Zen master Thich
Mm,
Nhat Hanh, and then I started bringing it into medicine in 2010, very few people had heard of that word, but now it's on the cover of magazines and all of this kind of stuff. So I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about what that word means.
mm,
So I'm just going to share my own perspective. First of all, I don't think that the word mindfulness can be um, defined in words.
mm,
Mindfulness to me is an experience, it's a way of being. It's kind of like saying, what does chocolate taste like? What does Beethoven sound like? I mean, we can put words to it, and there is, reasons to do that. And we cannot be limited to those words, and we can't be fooled into thinking that those words actually capture what mindfulness.
mm,
So that's the first thing. Second thing,
mhm,
if you did have to put it into words, I am a fan of John Kabat-Zinn's classic definition, but I give
mhm,
it a little bit of twist. So John Kabat-Zinn, who, as your listeners may or may not know, he trained both of us, by the way, so we both
mhm.
know him. He is a real pioneer in the field of mindfulness studies
Yeah.
in the United States and in North America and in the West. He defined mindfulness as paying attention in a particular way on purpose, in the present moment, and without judgment.
Mhm.
And that's one of the definitions he gave. He actually gave lots of different definitions, and he wasn't too attached to definitions either. But I like to twist that a little bit. I say mindfulness is paying attention in a particular way on purpose, in the present moment, and with unconditional love. And so I just
Mm,
substitute non-judgment with unconditional love. And the reason I do that is I like to warm up that definition a little bit. Because
mm,
for me, in my experience, when we're present and paying attention, but we don't have that love, or if you prefer kindness, compassion, friendliness, then actually paying attention to the present moment can actually be quite difficult,
mm,
especially when we're experiencing pain, when we're experiencing heartbreak, when we're experiencing depression, anxiety, or physical pain or grief.
mhm.
Being present is hard. It's hard.
Yeah.
So we need that compassion. We need that love in order for presence to be healing. Now, that said, I don't want people to get too attached to my definition either, because conditional love can also be hard, especially if you haven't experienced it before, or you
Mm,
haven't known how to offer it to yourself, or no one's given you that unconditional love. So if that word doesn't resonate for you, then that's okay too. Find another way. It's not, unconditional love is not meant to be an impossible task that, again, you have to be perfect at. It's really just an invitation to kind of look in that direction. So that's the reason that I offer it. And I've learned that from Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh, to be honest, who,
mhm.
when I hear him talk about mindfulness, love is part of that definition,
Yeah.
inherently.
Yeah. I love that way of describing it. This the love aspect of it, and that's something for me. You asked me earlier in terms of my journey. I
Yeah.
did have a bit of a like light bulb moment around what this work is,
Mm.
and but it didn't begin this way. It began with curiosity as a teen with martial arts,
Oh,
and
yeah.
it used to take like 1 minute at the end of the class, and we would just sit
Right.
and but I had no idea what that meant or had no idea what mindfulness is.
Yeah.
All I know is I like that. Like, oh,
Yeah.
we're just gonna sit for it. I liked it, and then I didn't continue really.
Uh-huh.
And it was in the early 2000s where really I had a breakdown. So kind of
Okay.
grief, loss, multiple things happened, health issues,
Mm.
you know, graduate school, and next thing you know, I'm on disability from work. Like,
Wow. Yes.
whoa, okay, I
Mm.
gotta I gotta really do things different here. So, it led me back to being curious, like, what is this? What's going on? So, doing counseling myself and having known of the research and the counseling, I'm like, oh, even then, 20 something years ago, I was like, oh, this has a good impact on well-being. So I
Yeah.
started doing like retreats and then did the mindfulness-based stress reduction MBSR program. But all of it came together for me in a 1 week training with John Kabat-Zinn. It used to be called Mind Body Medicine.
Yes.
And there's something like, I by then I became a kind of what I thought a good meditator. I just know how to meditate.
Badge of honor.
Yeah, like I'm doing a check. I know how to meditate. But it was
Mm.
like a moment of realizing what John Kabat-Zinn calls this love affair with life and
Mm.
mindfulness,
Yeah.
like being with the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I got it. Like, wait, this is not just sitting in my cushion.
Hmm.
This is what I do when I can't find my wallet, when someone cuts me off in traffic,
Yeah.
when I've got pain,
Yeah.
when I'm feeling blah.
Mm.
So thank you for bringing that up because it's not just a head thing. We meditate.
Oh, no, no.
Yeah.
And I think, there's some really lovely things I hear from your story, which really ring true to me. Number one is you mentioned your martial arts teacher. That
Mm.
isn't that such a great example of a non-parental adult who had a profound impact on you? And maybe they don't even know it.
Yeah.
Uh, maybe I don't know if you've ever told them that or if you've ever gotten back in touch with that person, but that's an example of how seeds are planted as a young person.
Yes.
They grow, years later in ways that the person who is planting those seeds may have no idea. And, for me, working with young people, I see that all the time
Yeah.
in my practice. And it really gives me meaning when I hear from someone who I worked with, years ago, and I'll just give some examples. I've been hearing lately from
Mm.
I've heard lately from three different people who took my
Mm.
mindfulness for teens course when it was just getting started. So I'm talking 2012, 2013.
Mm.
And now 10, 11 years later, they're getting back in touch with me and they're health professionals, their
Wow.
colleagues, their university students, their grad students, and they're telling me, that course made a huge difference in my life. It helped me to get through
Mm.
what what I was going through at the time. And I
Mm.
would have never have known that if, they didn't get in touch with me or if I didn't just see them actually at work. Some of them literally, I saw them at
Oh,
work. You
what
might not remember me because I was a teenager when we met 10 years ago. And now here I am working at the hospital with you. I mean, that's just amazing, right? Yeah. So that's one thing. The other thing you said is that you came to the practice just as I did through some suffering.
yeah.
You were going through a hard time. And I was too. And when I think about the roots of mindfulness, the historical roots of mindfulness, it is all about how do we respond to suffering and how
Mm.
do we in fact heal suffering or how do we be present with suffering. And
Mm.
when we go back to like the Buddha and
Mhm.
other spiritual teachers from thousands of years ago, like that's what they taught is how to deal with suffering.
Yeah.
So I think I've seen that many times. Most of us who are interested in mindfulness, whether we're professionals, whether we're, going through a health condition, they're suffering there, and we need a way to handle it. And modern medicine has a lot of great tools.
Yeah.
Science has been phenomenal with our medicines, our procedures, our diagnostics, but it hasn't really given us a way to respond to suffering. I think that's something that medicine, and in my medical training, like I have to say, I don't think I heard that word suffering at all in medical school.
Mm.
You know, we were taught how to fix, we were taught how to diagnose, we were taught how to treat, but we were not taught how to respond to suffering. And that's maybe something that medicine doesn't offer. That's something like mindfulness can offer.
Mm.
When we're sick, when we're in pain, there's the sickness and the pain, and then there's also a suffering, which might be a little bit different from that sickness or pain.
Mm.
That's
You,
where I think mindfulness can come in.
Yeah. You're also actually highlighting, the difference between this curing and healing as well, because sometimes the illness, whether it's physical or psychological, like it's not about just curing it, but how can we heal around? How can we still thrive and be who we are with whatever it is, whatever
Absolutely.
illness? So, and that is a different perspective,
Yeah,
isn't
yeah.
it?
And that's something that I hope that we have more in medicine and more in society. Like I said, medicine is good with curing, but sometimes there's things that we cannot cure. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a fact. And even when we can cure, there's still suffering often. There's
Yeah.
still, and so how do we respond to that too? And as a doctor, one of the things that I've really been learning during my career is how do I know the difference between what is needed right now with this patient in front of me? Are they needing curing?
Mm.
Are they needing healing? Do I have the capacity to offer either of those? And do I
Wow.
have the wisdom to know which is which? And sometimes it can switch moment to moment, even within the same conversation. I can be in curing mode, and then I need to be in healing mode or presence mode or bearing witness mode because fixing is not what's called for, or maybe it's not possible in that moment. And so my mindfulness practice actually really helps me to be able to discern what's needed, and how do I show up in a moment to moment situation with a patient or family that's really
Mm.
suffering and in pain.
Talk about being present with your patients, and it's like being there.
Yeah,
Suspending assumption of the knowing, like this is 100% what they need. Like how you're describing is, let's meet this person, this human being, and find out what they're needing right now. It may change in 2 minutes, but what is it here? So instead of like, I guess the beginner's mind, this is a very mindfulness approach, isn't it? Like, don't
that
know.
curiosity, the
Yeah.
open. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. Can you say a little more about the mental health in terms of, we know quite a bit of research on the benefits. What have you seen, in terms of why even bother with mindfulness and, its possible benefits for mental health for those who maybe not aware of it?
Yeah. I would say on the research side, mindfulness is a fairly well what we would call an evidence-based intervention at this point for a
Mhm.
variety of mental health conditions, uh, especially in adults. And in particular, things like depression and anxiety. There's also some really interesting work looking at substance use, and looking at other diagnoses. There are many therapies that target specific mental health challenges or conditions or symptoms, like mindfulness-based stress reduction,
Mhm.
which is for general stress, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, which is for depression, mindfulness-based relapse and prevention, which is for substance use, dialectical behavioral therapy, which is for something called emotional dysregulation or
Mhm.
personality disorder. So there's a fairly good amount of research in the adult world. There's still not enough availability of mindfulness for the population, but I think the science is growing. For
Yeah.
adolescents, we have a lot farther to go on the research front,
Mm.
just because people haven't been researching it for nearly as long. And in fact, when I first got into this field with adolescence and mindfulness, the general perception was, well, you can't really teach teenagers to meditate or to be mindful. They're too young for that, which I have
Ah,
found is definitely not the case. And you've experienced that
yeah.
yourself. And now the research base is starting to grow, including in my own program and many other researchers around the world, showing some similar benefits to mindfulness for adolescent mental health in all of
Mm.
those areas that I just mentioned. But I have to say that the research is still evolving, still growing, and still in its early stages. And then also, when we talk about mental health, from the point of view of mindfulness, and as a medical physician, I
Mm.
don't separate mental health from physical health. I really see them as
Yeah.
one. I see the body and the mind as one. And you mentioned mind body medicine as the name of the training that you took with John Kabat-Zinn.
Mm.
So it's the same for me. And so a lot of what I try to help young people handle are things that might be considered physical. So that includes
Mm.
chronic pain, for example,
Yes.
which mindfulness can be really helpful, not necessarily in getting rid of the pain, but in helping to alleviate some of the suffering that is associated with that pain.
Yeah. And I'm thinking as well of substance use and substance abuse. And because how big of a problem is it now for teens from your current?
It is huge.
Yeah.
I have to say, right now in British Columbia, which is where the two of us live,
Mm.
uh, overdoses are the number one cause of death of teenagers. The
Oh,
number,
wow.
yeah.
Yeah.
And that's relatively new, just in the last few years. Historically, the biggest causes of death have been things like motor vehicle crashes,
Mm.
suicide, and homicide. But overdoses have overtaken that, and we're in a worldwide overdose crisis right now, and mostly opioids, mostly driven by fentanyl. So it is one of the things that keeps me awake. Is teenagers who are really worried about who are at risk of death from overdose.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what's making this work so important. And, working with the mind,
Yeah.
because it really affects. And I know you speak about this, you have the cafeteria effect. And I wonder if you can share a little bit about that, because it'll be helpful to look into how does our mind,
Mm.
our mood affect our thoughts. There's a link here. And I wonder if you can share a little bit about that, this mood and the impact on what thoughts we
Yeah.
have.
So in our course for teenagers, it's called Mars A, Mindful Awareness and Resilience
Mm.
Skills for Adolescents. We've adapted some of the things that other researchers and psychologists have developed from mindfulness-based cognitive therapy
Mhm.
and cognitive behavioral therapy, but bringing a mindfulness element into it.
Mm.
And so mindfulness, we talked about is paying attention in a particular way. There is always something that we're paying attention to. Mindfulness is always mindfulness of something. And so
Mm.
in this case, we're talking about mindfulness of our thinking and mindfulness of our emotions and how those two are related. And so we walk
Mm.
teenagers through a scenario. We ask them to imagine, pretend that you're at school and you're in class and your teacher criticizes you for something that you did in class,
Mhm.
feeling really stressed, you're embarrassed, you're upset, maybe you're pissed off.
So they can
And then,
imagine a scenario, and for the adults who are listening too, you can imagine you walking into a coffee shop,
mhm,
right?
yeah.
So same thing, and something happened, and you're
Yeah, but
upset.
something happened, you're upset, right?
Yeah.
Maybe you got off in traffic,
Mhm.
and someone yelled at you on the road or something like that.
Yeah.
And so you get to the cafeteria, and then you see your friend in the cafeteria, who you like to sit with,
Mm.
and you say hi, but they don't say hi back.
Mm.
What are you thinking? And what might be going through your mind? What's the story behind why your friend didn't say hi? And so
Mm.
often the kids will say things like, they heard what happened, they were laughing at me, they were judging me.
Mm.
So those are negative thoughts that are associated with a negative emotion. And then we say, okay, let's have a reset. Let's start with a different scenario, similar but different. So let's say that you're in the class and your teacher praises you for something that you did really well. And you're feeling
Mm.
really good, and all of your classmates are like, impressed with what you did, and they're really liking this. And so you're in a good mood. And so take a moment to imagine what this might be like.
Mm.
So for an adult, it might be like, you had a really easy commute and there was no traffic, and you like
And your favorite song is playing, and you had a good night's sleep.
totally. And then you get to the cafeteria, and same situation. You see your friend, you wave to them, but they don't wave back. So what's the story now?
That might be
And
different. Like, oh, they might be just busy, or like, oh, I wonder if they're stressed, or
yeah, so maybe compassion arises,
Mm.
empathy, curiosity for the other person. Exactly. And so that's a great example of how our mood affects our thoughts, and also thoughts affect our mood too. So it's a two-way relationship. And so just
Mm.
experiencing that and seeing how it can come to life in real life situations for teenagers, I think really makes that quite powerful learning.
Mm. So it really gets us to take a closer look at the thoughts
Mhm.
and whether we believe the thoughts or not believe the thoughts.
Yeah, and I grew up in the United States where bumper stickers are really common. And so I imagine bumper stickers saying, you know, thoughts are not facts. Don't believe everything you think. And I think I actually have seen a bumper sticker like
Oh,
that.
that's a great one.
Yeah, yeah, don't believe everything you think. And in Buddhism and
Mm.
with Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh, he'll say things like, "Are you sure?"
Yes.
A thought.
Yes.
Are you sure? Yeah, or
Mm.
maybe you are partially correct, but not fully correct. There's always more. There's always more.
Yes.
Part of the Zen training is having that openness. And I've also heard this teaching from indigenous people too. So
Mm.
right now at my health authority, at Provincial Health Services Authority, we're studying the Coast Salish teachings, and the Coast
Mm.
Salish is the people whose lands that we're on in
Mhm.
coastal British Columbia. And so we have an elder named Salkson Shane Point, and he's gifted these 6 Coast Salish wisdom teachings to our whole organization. And one
Mm.
of them, which really, actually, they all really resonate with me. They all have a very mindful quality, but one of them that's coming to mind right now is open your heart and mind.
Wow.
Your heart and mind. So this is ancient wisdom. This crosses cultures. Indigenous people have this wisdom. People from the East have this wisdom. People from
Mm.
all around the world have this wisdom, whether we call it mindfulness or not.
Mm. So it's tapping really to this human wisdom from
I
all different cultures and backgrounds, and really honoring all the different traditions, because after all, there's the common humanity really in all of us. And
exactly.
sometimes, we create separation. It's like, oh, these are these people or these people, and we create an othering, and
Yeah.
it creates such a disconnect.
Yeah, it's
Mm.
dehuman it's a dehumanization, and that
Yeah.
at the root of a lot of our conflict and wars and oppression that we see and have seen throughout history, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah. You're talking about this. Are you sure? From
Mhm.
Thich Nhat Hanh, and I had a chance actually to do a 1 week retreat. I think it was like, I don't know, thousand something people,
Mhm.
and
Yeah, where was this
it
one?
was actually in Toronto. He was visiting, and I flew in, and it was just like
Great.
it was incredible. And because it was so gentle, and at the beginning, to be frank, I could feel like irritation or restlessness. I'm like, we're singing here, and like,
There's
and I was like,
happiness,
yeah, yeah.
smiling.
I'm like, when are we gonna get to the meditation? You know what I mean? And but literally, it was like a slow powerhouse, a slow cook our house. And by, I don't know, day 3, day 4, something in me just kind of like, woof,
Yeah,
the presence, this deep penetrating type of practice. And it's just so beautiful. This, are you sure? Look again.
yeah,
Like, and there's a joy.
yeah.
And I wonder if you can speak a little bit about that joy. Sometimes we get caught in like, I just got to get rid of a problem, or I got to reduce my suffering, but there's something about joy. And
Hmm.
there's, I don't know, you speak about a practice as well, but I think
Hmm.
smile breathing, but what about joy in practice?
Yeah. Joy is an energy and it gives us motivation. And I think when our practice has that element of joy, and it doesn't mean that we're always happy, okay? Let's be really clear. Mindfulness doesn't mean you pretend that everything's okay, you ignore pain, and
Mm,
you just put on a fake smile. That is not
right.
mindfulness, okay? That's sometimes people call that like bypassing, all
Yeah.
right? Um, but when we can touch the elements of joy that are available, even in the midst of suffering, then that gives us energy to continue the practice. And when our practice
Mm,
has that element of joy, then it becomes sustainable. It becomes something that we
mm,
can continue lifelong. But when we don't have that element of joy, it's just something that we're forcing ourselves to do. It makes it very hard to continue. So that's one thing. The other thing I would say is that when we are fully aware of what's happening, it's actually quite natural to feel joy. And in
mm,
fact, I think our bodies and our biology are designed to be able to experience joy. It's part of who we are as humans.
Mm.
And so, just as examples, when I'll just share a very practical example. Walking
Mhm.
around the hospital at work during a regular work
Mm.
day, I'm going from one building to another. And then I see a tree,
Mm.
a really beautiful tree that I have
Mm.
never noticed before, even though I've walked down that path hundreds of times. Why did I notice it that day? It's because I was more open, because I was more curious, because I was willing to be aware. And when I'm willing to be aware, then that joy is natural. And then when I, take 5 seconds or 3 breaths to just notice that and savor that, then the joy arises pretty naturally. And, it
Mm.
doesn't mean that I don't have the stress or the pain or the anxiety or whatever it is, but I can also meet that pain and anxiety with some presence, with some curiosity, and a natural joy arises. And it actually helps me to hold that pain a little bit better.
Mm.
And then, when we work with teenagers, we can see that a lot. Like, for example, teenagers who have chronic pain. I
Mm.
hear this story quite frequently where they have a story about their pain. And we talked about thoughts and are you sure? And so their story might be, I'm in pain all the time, 10 out of 10 pain. I can't live my life. It's ruined everything. And, it's quite understandable why they would
Yeah.
have that story because pain is painful. So I don't judge anyone for having that story. And at the same time, maybe that story
Mm.
isn't completely true. Maybe that story is only partially true. Maybe there's more to it. And if we can have a little flexibility around that story, then maybe they can have a different relationship with their pain. So what we actually do is we ask them to get to know their pain a little bit better. We ask
Mm.
them to be present with that pain. And that's super counterintuitive, right? Because of course they come to the course and they're like, I'm going to learn how to get rid of pain, you know?
Yes.
And unfortunately, that's not the case.
Mm.
However, if they can learn how to be with their pain and actually to have that curiosity and beginner's mind,
Mm.
maybe they can learn things about their pain. Maybe and I do hear this quite often, oh, maybe the pain's not what I thought it was. Maybe it's not 10 out of 10 all the time.
Mm.
Maybe there are moments, even brief moments throughout the day, where the pain is 9 out of 10 or 5 out of 10.
Yeah.
Or maybe I can actually do things that I didn't know that I could do with my pain. Or maybe I noticed, the relationship between mood and emotions. Maybe I noticed that when I have these stories about my pain, it actually drives my mood down and it drives my pain up.
Ah.
And so if I can let go of some of those and think about my pain differently, discover new things about my pain, discover new things about myself living with pain, then I can have a different relationship with pain. And that's something that teenagers are very capable of. And we see that on a regular basis in our mindfulness groups. So that's bringing that curiosity, that openness, even to something like pain. Of course, we don't start with pain because that's
Right.
so we start with, something like eating a raisin or a piece of chocolate.
Yes. But really, it's building, as you're sharing this, is changing the relationship. How you're naming it is changing relationship to the pain, not like how can I avoid, get rid of, eliminate. And obviously, if there's things that can help reduce it, that's great. Like you said earlier, like if there's
Absolutely.
something can help, let's help. But if it
And that's
isn't,
me with my doctor fixer hat on. So, is there a medication? Is there a treatment that can reduce the pain? Of course, we do those things. And we look at how can we change the relationship with pain when it's there. So it's not either or, it's both and.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I guess that also leads to, I know you speak about it in the book, and by the way, I mentioned the book earlier. It's really filled with very practical, and I'll put the title as well, The Mindful Teen, in the show notes. Very practical tips and tools. And you speak in there as well about chronic versus acute stress and healthy or positive and negative coping. I wonder if you can share a little bit about that for teens and adults in terms of those differences.
Yeah, when we look at what are often called adolescent health risk behaviors,
Mm.
these are the things that teenagers do that sometimes often have negative consequences to their health and that the adults don't want them to do. We've
Mm.
mentioned some of them already. Substance use. Another one would be disordered eating.
Yeah.
Another one would be fighting or violence. Another might be self harm, cutting, self injury. Another one might be isolating. And so these are things that they do have negative consequences, but it's important to know why are teenagers doing these. And teenagers are doing these behaviors as a response to stress. And when teenagers and adults, when we get stressed, it doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
One of the really important things about teenagers is that they are learning how to handle stress. This is actually one of the most important developmental tasks
Mm.
in this period of life. And they haven't had the life experience to know how to do it. So they're figuring it out as they go. And so I talk about generally two categories of coping. One is negative coping or unhealthy coping. So those are some of these health risk behaviors that we talked about. And it doesn't mean that it doesn't work. In fact, I have to be really honest when I'm working with a teenager and they say, when I get really stressed out or I get anxious, and then I, use a substance, I feel a little bit better. My
Hmm.
anxiety is
Hmm.
gone, or I don't notice the pain as much. That's true. And what happens is that can lead to other consequences, behaviors or health consequences that then end up causing more stress. And then
Mm.
kids get caught up in a
Wow.
stress and negative coping strategy. And so, what I want to guide people to do, teenagers to do, and I think all adults can help teenagers learn how to do this is, first of all, validate and recognize why the teenagers are doing these health, these unhealthy behaviors. And secondly, explore with them, are there alternatives? Are there things that you can do that maybe don't lead to more stress, that don't lead to
Mm.
consequences? And so those are healthy or positive coping mechanisms, such as mindfulness. And there are many others. Of course,
Mhm.
mindfulness doesn't have a monopoly on that, but
Okay.
that to healthy coping, and those can be lifelong healthy behaviors.
Yeah. And just mindfulness itself can lead us to kind of tap into what's needed now. Like
Absolutely,
taking
mindfulness.
the pause. It's like what am I needing now? Instead of
Yeah,
the autopilot reacting that we as humans get into. Like we're just gonna react. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Mm. This I know we were speaking about this earlier, but about this social pediatrics.
Mm.
Can you say a little bit about that? Because as I'm learning about it, it's actually very hopeful and very encouraging. So, what is social pediatrics?
I've learned a lot about social pediatrics. Again, I want to give credit to my mentors and teachers. And Dr. Christine Locke at BC Children's Hospital in UBC has been a real leader in that
Mm.
and inspiration for me. And social pediatrics is a type of pediatrics that recognizes that kids and teenagers' health is profoundly impacted by the social environments that they live in.
Mm.
It's not only what's happening in their cells, in their biology, in their biochemistry, in the disease processes, but it is very much what happens in their lives, in their neighborhoods, in their families, in their communities. And in
Mm.
fact, that is the majority of what determines health is those social things, not those biological things. And
Mm.
so if we want to advance child health and youth health, and if we want them to be healthier, we really have to look at these social determinants of health, and that's the term that we use in medicine. These social
Mm.
determinants of health, and I'll just give some examples.
Yes,
Uh,
please.
Racism is a huge one. Poverty, violence in the community, abuse, discrimination against gender identity,
Mm.
sexual orientation, economic inequality. And these are things that teenagers don't choose. Those are things that happen to them, but that have profound effects. And so, even if
Mm.
we talk about like what seems to be a choice, a quote unquote choice, like substance use,
Yeah.
we know through an immense amount of research that social determinants of health have a huge influence on who is more likely or less likely to develop a substance use disorder. And it
Mm.
is the people who experience more social determinants of health, more social adversity that they did not choose, which may make them more likely to turn to substances to cope with that
Mm.
adversity and to cope with that stress. So social determinants are huge. Social pediatrics tries to address those social determinants, tries to work with communities that are disproportionately affected by those social determinants with values of equity, of justice, in the service of healthcare. So not only do we,
Oh.
prescribe a medication for a kid with asthma, for example, but we would also look at, well, what is causing that asthma? Is it because they live in, substandard housing, or is it because that their neighborhood has in unequal levels of pollution, or is it because
Mm.
they don't have the same access or barriers to a healthy environment or healthy nutrition?
Mm. So that means there's even programs right now that are really progressing this work.
Oh, absolutely. And this
Yeah.
is a kind of an international movement. And it's not only in
Mm,
pediatrics, there's social medicine, working with adults as well.
mm,
That is really healthcare professionals and not only physicians, by the way. In fact, physicians are only a small piece of it, but health professionals, we have to work with social workers, we have to work with nursing, we have to work with
mm,
members of the community and actually really listen to and learn from the communities that are affected so that way we can work and partner with those communities in a way that is effective and meeting their needs and
mm.
that's respectful. So that's the social pediatrics model. It looks different in every community and every city.
Yeah.
Every place has their own unique strengths as well as their own unique challenges. But it's something that really inspires me, and I'm lucky to work with some great colleagues who are
Mm.
doing that work every single day.
Well, I'm sure very, very lucky to be working with you too, because I feel that whenever we connect, and I'm sure the listeners feel the same way. So I'm wondering, a couple. I know we're almost at the end, but I just have two more things that I'm really curious about, which is
Yeah.
this mindful healing course that you've developed. So, what for healthcare providers?
Mm.
I wonder if you can say a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, I want to contextualize it a little bit too, before I talk about that course in particular. At BC Children's Hospital, I'm really honored to be working with a fantastic team, including Dr. Joanna McDermott, my associate director, and Shar Black, our program manager, with the BC Children's Hospital Center for Mindfulness.
Mm,
And our vision is to nurture and co-create a more mindful hospital because we really believe that mindfulness is not only for patients, not only for the teenagers, the individuals we serve, but it's also for the health professionals who are serving the teenagers for all of the reasons that we talked about earlier, that the health professionals really need to have presence, need to embody mindfulness, compassion, and love. And then it's also for the parents and caregivers. And so we're really wanting to create a more mindful hospital, a more mindful community where everyone who works at or experiences our hospital has a mindful experience and has the opportunity to learn mindfulness. So
mm,
that's really where this mindful healing course came out of, is that vision and
mm,
that aspiration. And so the course in particular is a course for health professionals. It's an 8 week or 8 session course, largely based on some other great work by colleagues at the University of Rochester, specifically Ron Epstein and
mm,
Mick Krasner, who are physicians who have done a ton of work teaching mindfulness to physicians and health
mm,
professionals. Of course, they've worked a lot with John Kabat-Zinn as well. So that, these are all like different branches
mhm,
of a big tree. So I've had the opportunity to train with Dr. Krasner and Epstein, learn their curriculum, which is called Mindful Practice. It's a really
mhm,
wonderful curriculum, and Ron has a great book called Attending, which I recommend to everybody. And then what we've done at BC Children's Hospital is we've just adapted it for our population, for a format that works for us. We've brought in some other things, including from Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh, and just kind of renamed it with their permission, kind
mhm,
of repackaged, modified it, and renamed it for our population. And right now we are teaching our residents, our pediatric residents.
mm,
So we're now in our 4th year of all of the pediatric residents at our hospital have gone through this course. We're also teaching it to other health professionals, including physicians, nurses, allied health. We have several people who are trained to facilitate it. So it's just a really lovely way to bring mindfulness into our hospital, and it's just one of those pillars, of those 3 pillars: health professionals, teenagers and children, and parents and caregivers that we're hoping to
mm.
touch here.
What an incredible vision and an actual unfolding of the practice that you've embodied, others have embodied, and a supportive community of professionals in bringing this. And as you were speaking, I couldn't help but have this image of, Thich Nhat Hanh speaks about that often. It's like, what if, we can be ripples
Mm,
of even how we step and walk, there can be ripples of peace. We can
ex-
ripple this goodness. And as you're speaking, I could feel that ripple. I'm like, wow, this is actually really incredible work,
yeah.
and I'm really so happy to hear about it. And may this spread to other hospitals.
I hope so. It's
Yes.
we are definitely working with other hospitals. A
Yes.
Sick Kids Hospital in the University of Toronto are doing some things along these lines as well. I do think it's a larger movement, and I think it's a game changer that could really change healthcare and change society with this kind of essential insight. Like as you said, we are ripples, we are drops in the water.
Mm,
Mindfulness is not just about ourselves as individuals, and we ourselves don't live as isolated individuals, but we are interconnected, deeply interconnected with each other. And so how we are has an effect on how others are. And so if you could imagine, health patients coming into the hospital, and they meet a health professional who is embodying that mindful
yeah.
presence, whether they're saying that or not, and probably they won't. Most of the time they're not going to say, hey, I'm being mindful right now. No, it's just going to be the way that they show up.
Yeah.
That's going to have a ripple effect and transform the entire experience of being in a hospital and experiencing illness and healing, I think.
Mm. That's actually, people are impacted more by that, by sensing someone who's embodying it rather than kind of lecturing them on what
Mm,
mindfulness is. They can feel it like, ooh, whatever's happening there, I want
yeah.
more of that. Right?
Exactly. And could
Yeah.
you imagine, you mentioned like these retreats that you've been
Mm.
on. Can you imagine if being in a hospital felt like being on a retreat?
Oh,
And certainly that's not the case right now, but
yeah.
that's the vision, that's the dream.
Mm.
And I think we can get there.
Yeah. That's an incredible vision to hold. And not just a theory, but actual actions being taken towards it. Yeah. So I'm wondering before we end, could you guide us? I know you speak about this breath and smiling breath as just there's so many different practices, and would you be capable of guiding us through a short
Yeah, of course.
couple of minutes of that? And those who are listening, as long as you're not driving or operating machinery, feel free to follow along if you wish, and
Right.
that'll be a treat.
So instead of talking about breathing and smiling, we'll get to experience it.
Right.
So I'm going to start by inviting a sound of this bell. And we can consider the voice of the bell to be a friend, just inviting us to really be here right now. There's nowhere to go, there's nothing to do. Simply being present in this moment is more than enough, just as we are. And connecting with our breathing, recognizing the breath as a source of life, knowing that we're alive, without needing to force our breathing, to work at it, to change it. Simply resting our attention, breathing in, I know that I'm breathing in. Breathing out, I know that I'm breathing out. In, out. And as we breathe, bringing a gentle smile to the corner of our lips. This is an invitation to bring some kindness and friendliness to this moment. And it doesn't mean that we're pretending to be happy. It doesn't mean that we're ignoring pain and suffering. But we're meeting that pain and suffering with friendliness, just as we might smile to a friend who we saw on the street, even if they were having a hard time. So simply experimenting with this, bringing a gentle smile to the corner of your lips. Breathing in, I know that I'm breathing in. Breathing out, smiling. Breathing, smiling. We'll hear a sound of the bell. And bringing your attention to whatever it is that you are doing, bringing your attention back to your environment, and perhaps continuing to breathe and smile as you go through the rest of your day.
Mm. What a treat. There's something that's I can feel in me settling while I can hear thoughts of like, oh, this was amazing. I want to keep going. I can hear thoughts. And when you guided this kind of gentle, like I could viscerally feel this, even though I don't know how big of a smile, I wasn't looking, but
No matter.
I could feel like a lightness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, thank you for practicing with that, for giving it a try.
Thank you for sharing this work and giving us a taste of this beautiful work and really what's possible. And you are living that. Um, deep gratitude to you for your generosity of time, of wisdom, and really all the work you do that contributes to so many people, not just to the field itself, pediatrics, not just to the teens, to their parents, to families, to communities. Truly, thank you for your work. And I look
Thank
forward to
you.
actually connecting outside of this in the future again.
It's been a really joyful conversation, and I appreciate everything that you do to offer this platform and offer this healing practice to the world. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And I want to also thank all the listeners. Thank you for listening. And if you're watching on YouTube, thank you for watching. If you found this useful and helpful, feel free to share, like, and maybe subscribe if you haven't. And if you're interested in any mindfulness events, like free session about mindfulness, you can visit our website at the centerformindfulness.ca. I'll put that in the show notes as well as all the links and names of the programs and books that Dr. Vo has. Thank you again. May your moments be filled with ease and may you be present in as many of them. Thank you.